I graduated from Indiana University with a degree in accountancy. So I have a bachelor's of science in accountancy. And then I stayed a fifth year and I have a minor in finance. I started my career as a CPA with Price Waterhouse. And from there, I spent the rest of my career in banking. Our family's in the banking business, has been since 1971. And I eventually followed in my father's footsteps and joined him with the bank that he had bought in 1971 after spending about 12 years with other banks to gain experience. And eventually before I went to work with him, I ended my career at Chase in capital markets. I'm 52. I've been retired since about 45. We sold the bank and I chose not to stay on with the new team. And since then, I've been looking at opportunities such as franchising, and the timing was right about a year ago, post-COVID. I didn't want to do anything when COVID hit. Obviously, a lot of unknowns and uncertainties. I waited that amount of time between kind of retiring to do something because my kids, I wanted to get them off to college, my ex-wife and I, and they are currently a senior at Ole Miss, and I have a junior at sophomore at University of Tennessee. So the timing was ripe for me to look at something challenging, something fun, and something to diversify my income, not necessarily having to rely on this income, but more so the challenge, some diversification of my investment portfolio, and more importantly, something that I felt like I could have fun with. And in doing so, there are many opportunities out there, as you know, with franchises. And I spent some time researching some franchises using my background and experience in accounting and banking. Created a metrics of 9 blocks. And I said, every box needs to be checked, and it needs to be checked in its entirety. There's no half checking or I'm not certain. And those all involved everything from the 5 C's of credit, from capital, cash flow, competition. I looked at return on equity, capital. Capital was a huge thing to me, the capital investment and the return there. And then I looked at where I could be passive if I had to be versus be hands-on. And then I looked at somewhat of a legacy. So that's how I ended up, and we'll get to that. I chose 2 concepts, one for me more personally, to fit kind of my hobbies and my habits, and then one for potentially my daughters, particularly my oldest daughter, to possibly take over. So that being said, as I was doing my research, I felt overwhelmed, and me being probably more so the accountant and the banker being very analytical, I felt it was in my best interest to turn to someone professionally that does it for a living. And I did my research online, again, being very analytical and anal. And I probably reached out to just under a dozen firms, and with no particular criteria here other than feedback, what was available through the internet, and just a perception I got once I had a first conversation with them. And that happened to be Krista and Kevin. And I kind of paralleled at the same time, and I was cheating, I guess you could say, a little bit, in the fact that it's kind of like a broker with your house. I wasn't playing the 2 against each other, but I had not committed, but I kind of, basically had it down to 2, and then it was pretty clear who I was going to use. So I chose to use them to help me with my endeavors. And so here we are today. We've closed on the 2 concepts, And that's basically my life history from college till today. Most franchisors want to get you in the door and just make a sale. Yes, they want you to be successful, but beyond the success, which they can't entirely control, beyond what concept they're presenting to the public and what they think works is making a sale, right? Once they make a sale, they've got your licenses. And so I felt it necessary to get good feedback about what concepts, other than what I was reading, that brokers, franchise brokers, had with various franchisors. And so that was filter number one. And then filter number two was the legality of getting through an FDD, franchise disclosure document. And as much experience as I've had at looking at legal documents from the bank side, you need to really have a good sense of clarity on what you're getting into. And those two were critical, again, for me trying to filter good concepts versus not such good concepts, as well as from a financial standpoint, what ones I felt were presenting me with good and accurate information. And in Krista and Kevin's situation in particular, Krista was more than accommodating and helpful in reading through the FDD, presenting me with cautionary notes to the extent where I was able to, which a lot of people don't do, probably the majority don't do, would be my guess. I hired an attorney to review the FDD, and in doing so, incorporated some things that Krista had concerns about. And while you don't get much changed in an FDD, we were able to, before we signed the financial disclosure document and the franchisee agreement, we were able to get some things in our favor. So she was more than helpful there. She was very thorough. She oftentimes would go through the document and create her own Word document section by section and just say no comment, or another section, red flag, fees are very high for the industry from what we see, et cetera. So it wasn't just a couple sentences here and there and email back. She actually put together a formal document that she had obviously spent a lot of time. It was very telling. Again, me with my experience professionally being in accounting and banking, it was not only the competition, it was the economics, it was everything that I think a potential franchisee should be aware of and look for. And she encompassed all areas. I tend to have very high expectations. My expectations are basically result driven. I think at the end of the day, whether you're in business, you're in athletics or whatever, you make the first team, you're at the top of your industry and business by the results, and they're not subjective, they're objective. And I thought they proved to me to be extremely knowledgeable, thorough, timely, helpful, and overall they just exceeded my expectations. And I tend to have some pretty high expectations, having been a president of a bank. And so I don't think you can do enough homework. Don't think if you're a chef, don't think you can buy a franchise in the restaurant business or whatever, and you're not going to come across roadblocks or things that you have not come across. For example, the biggest thing that I'm coming through right now is with the inventory and the supply and demand. Leases are heavily landlord favored. And depending on how bad you want the space, there comes in to be economics that could prove not viable. As much as you love that location, that area, it's in your territory, it just economically may not prove viable because, as we know with housing, it's out of control. I guess I will say one more plug to Krista and Kevin and Thoughtful Franchise Brokers is they were also very, very helpful and given me people for other resources, such as an attorney who they don't know very well, it's just by reputation, who turns out to be out of Pennsylvania. A very highly thought out firm once I did more investigation on myself. And they reviewed both my concepts, at my opinion, at a very reasonable rate, my FDDs. And that's just another relationship I've developed. And so they're helpful through the process from beginning to end. And what's nice is I can still call them and they're available at any time.